The envelope arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Chloe Turner found it wedged between a pizza delivery menu and a final notice from her electricity provider. She almost threw it away with the rest of the junk mail, but something made her pause. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and addressed in careful handwriting. The return address showed a solicitor's firm in a town she had never heard of. Thornfield. Chloe was 26 years old. She lived in a cramped flat in Manchester and worked double shifts at a coffee shop to make ends meet. She had no family left to speak of. Her mother had passed 5 years ago, and she had never known her father. So when she opened the envelope and read the contents, she had to sit down. The letter informed her that her grandmother, Eleanor Vance, had died 6 months earlier. It had taken this long to locate Chloe, the last surviving relative. Eleanor had lived alone in a house on Willow Lane, in the village of Thornfield. The house now belonged to Chloe. A key was enclosed. Chloe held the brass key in her palm and turned it over. It was old, worn smooth by decades of use. She tried to remember her grandmother. There was only one memory, a visit when she was 7 years old. A narrow staircase. A garden with roses. A woman with gray hair who hugged her too tightly and smelled like lavender. Her mother had never spoken about Thornfield. When Chloe asked questions, the subject changed. When she pushed harder, her mother's face would close off completely. Whatever had happened in that house, whatever had driven her mother away from her own family, it was a secret that went with her to the grave. Now the house was Chloe's. And the key in her hand felt like an invitation she couldn't refuse. The journey to Thornfield took most of the day. A train from Manchester to a junction town Chloe had never heard of, then a bus that rattled through narrow lanes bordered by stone walls and green fields. The landscape grew quieter with every mile, the villages smaller, the silences deeper. Thornfield itself was exactly what Chloe expected and nothing like it at all. A single main street lined with stone buildings. A village green with a war memorial. A shop that sold everything from bread to fishing bait. A pub called the Fox and Hounds. The kind of place where everyone noticed a stranger. The house on Willow Lane stood at the end of a row of terraced cottages, set back from the road behind a low stone wall. Roses grew wild in the front garden, their branches heavy with rain. The windows were dark. The front door was painted green, the paint peeling in places. Chloe stood at the gate for a long moment, key in hand. The house watched her silently. She walked up the path, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and stillness. A narrow hallway stretched before her, leading to a steep staircase. To the left, a sitting room with faded floral wallpaper and furniture draped in white sheets. To the right, a kitchen frozen in time, yellow formica countertops, a gas stove from the 1970s, a small wooden table with one chair. Chloe moved through the room slowly, touching things as she passed. On the mantelpiece in the sitting room, she found photographs. One showed a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes. Her grandmother. Another showed a girl of about 10, laughing at something outside the frame. Her mother. The house was full of ghosts. Chloe climbed the stairs to the upper floor. 2 doors faced each other across a narrow landing. The first opened into a bedroom that had clearly belonged to her grandmother. A single bed with a worn quilt. An armchair by the window overlooking the garden. A Bible on the nightstand, its pages soft with age. The second door revealed something unexpected. It was a girl's bedroom, preserved as if time had stopped. Flowered curtains at the window. A bed with a white coverlet. A shelf lined with porcelain dolls, their painted eyes staring blankly. And on a small desk beneath the window, a diary lay open to a blank page. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the diary. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting youthful and unsteady. Her mother's handwriting. She flipped through it slowly, reading fragments. School gossip. A boy she liked. Arguments with friends. Normal things. And then, near the back, an entry that stopped her cold. I'm not supposed to write this down. But I have to tell someone. I saw what happened to Mrs. Albright's cat. And I know who did it. If anything happens to me, someone needs to read this. The entry ended there. No explanation. No name. Just a child's fear, preserved in ink for decades. Chloe stared at the words, her heart beating faster. Her mother had been 10 years old when she wrote that. What had she seen? Who had she been afraid of? She turned the page, but the rest were blank. Chloe spent the afternoon exploring the house, but her mind kept returning to the diary. She searched the bedroom more thoroughly, looking for anything else her mother might have left behind. Under the bed she found a cardboard box filled with schoolbooks and drawings. In the wardrobe, a few dresses that must have belonged to a child. But nothing more about Mrs. Albright's cat or the secret her mother had been so afraid to write down. It was only when she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic that she found something significant. The attic was small and dusty, lit by a single bare bulb. Boxes and trunks were stacked against the walls, covered in decades of cobwebs. Chloe opened them one by one. Old clothes. Yellowed newspapers. Photographs of people she didn't recognize. At the bottom of a trunk filled with blankets, she found a shoebox wrapped in twine. Inside the shoebox were letters. Dozens of them, tied in bundles, dating back to the 1980s. They were addressed to her grandmother, Eleanor, and they were all from the same person. A man named Thomas. Chloe sat on the dusty attic floor and began to read. The early letters were warm, affectionate. Thomas wrote about wanting to marry Eleanor, to build a life with her. But somewhere in the middle of the stack, the tone changed. The letters became shorter. Colder. Accusatory. You can't keep avoiding me, Eleanor. I know what you did. And I know what your daughter saw. If you don't meet me on Friday, I'll have no choice but to tell everyone the truth. Chloe's hands trembled as she dug deeper. At the very bottom of the box, she found a final letter, dated 2 weeks before Eleanor Vance's death. This is your last chance. The cottage on Willow Lane should have been mine. Your father promised it to me. But you stole it, and you've been hiding here ever since, pretending you don't know what happened that night. I'm done waiting. I'm coming for what's mine. It was signed with a single initial, T. Sleep was impossible that night. Chloe lay in her grandmother's bed, the letters spread around her, reading and rereading every threatening line. Thomas. Whoever he was, he had hated Eleanor. He had threatened her repeatedly. And 2 weeks after his final letter, Eleanor Vance was dead. The official cause of death, according to the solicitor's paperwork, was heart failure. She was 78 years old. It was plausible. But the letters suggested something else entirely. In the morning, Chloe walked into the village. The shop on Main Street was the only place to get information, and the woman behind the counter was clearly the local source of all news. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and curious eyes that took in every detail of Chloe's appearance. "You'll be Eleanor's granddaughter," she said before Chloe could speak. It wasn't a question. "Heard someone was staying at the house. I'm Margaret. I was friends with your grandmother years ago." Chloe introduced herself, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the attic. "Did my grandmother ever mention anyone named Thomas?" Margaret's expression flickered. Just for a moment, something like unease passed through her eyes. "Thomas Barlow," she said quietly. "He lived here years ago. Used to be friends with your grandfather, back when he was alive. After your grandfather passed, Thomas developed some ideas about what he was owed. Caused quite a lot of trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Margaret glanced toward the door, checking for eavesdroppers. "He claimed your grandfather promised him this house. Promised it in writing," he said. "But no one ever found any such document. It was your grandmother's house, fair and square. Thomas didn't see it that way. He made threats. Nasty ones. Is he still here? Thomas?" Margaret shook her head. "Moved away. Must be 15 years ago now. No one heard from him since." Chloe thanked her and left, but something nagged at her. 15 years ago. The letters in the attic were from the 1980s and 1990s. If Thomas had moved away 15 years ago, why was he still writing threatening letters to her grandmother just months before she died? Back at the house, Chloe began a systematic search. She went through every room, every cupboard, every drawer. She lifted rugs and tapped floorboards. She checked behind furniture and inside hollow spaces. If there was more to find, she was determined to find it. In her grandmother's bedroom, beneath a loose floorboard under the bed, she discovered a small metal box. It was locked, but the lock was old and yielded easily to a screwdriver. Inside the box, she found documents. Old deeds to the house. Her grandparents' marriage certificate. Her mother's birth certificate. And a photograph. The photograph showed two men standing in front of this very house, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was clearly her grandfather. She recognized his face from other photographs. The other man was younger, dark-haired, with sharp eyes and a confident smile. On the back, in faded ink, "Me and Tom, 1965. Brothers forever." Brothers. Her grandfather and Thomas Barlow were brothers. Chloe sat back, stunned. Thomas wasn't just a family friend. He was family. Her grandfather's brother. Her great-uncle. And he had spent decades threatening her grandmother, trying to claim this house, terrorizing her mother. At the bottom of the box, beneath all the papers, she found one final item. A small notebook with a worn cover. She opened it. Her grandmother's handwriting. June 3, 1987. Thomas came to the house again today. He was drunk, angry. Said he'd never stop fighting for what was his. Sarah was hiding in her room. I could hear her crying. I don't know how much longer we can live like this. Sarah. Her mother. A child hiding from a man who terrified her. Chloe kept reading, the entries growing darker as the years passed. Eleanor Vance had kept the notebook for decades. Every encounter with Thomas Barlow was recorded in neat handwriting. Every threat. Every sleepless night. Every call to the police that went nowhere. August 12, 1992. The police came today. Thomas was outside the house again, shouting. They told him to move along. They told me there was nothing they could do unless he actually harmed someone. I asked them, what am I supposed to do until then? They had no answer. March 4, 1998. Sarah left today. She's 18 now, old enough to make her own choices. She said she couldn't live like this anymore. She said she'd never come back. I watched her walk down Willow Lane and I knew I might never see her again. I was right. December 21, 2003. Christmas alone again. Thomas sent a card. It said, I'm still here. Still waiting. Still patient. I burned it in the fireplace. The entries continued, year after year, a chronicle of quiet endurance and constant fear. And then, near the end of the notebook, something new. January 12, 2024. Thomas called today. His voice sounded different. Older, but also calmer. He said he wanted to make peace. Said he was dying and didn't want to go to his grave with this between us. I didn't believe him. I told him not to come near me. He said he understood. He said he'd write me a letter instead, explain everything. The next entry was dated a week later. The letter arrived. It's terrible. Everything he did, everything he hid. He wrote it all down. He says he's sending a copy to the police, confessing. But I don't trust him. I've hidden the letter where no one will find it. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. Chloe flipped through the remaining pages. They were blank. The notebook ended there. The letter Thomas had written. The confession. Where had Eleanor hidden it? Chloe searched the house again, more desperately this time. She emptied every drawer, checked every hollow space, lifted every floorboard that seemed loose. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows. She returned to her mother's childhood bedroom and stood in the center, turning slowly, trying to think like a woman who had spent her life hiding from a monster. Where would Eleanor Vance have hidden something so important? Her eyes fell on the shelf of porcelain dolls. They sat in a neat row, their painted eyes staring blankly ahead. Creepy things. Her mother had kept them all these years, or perhaps Eleanor had added to the collection after Sarah left. On impulse, Chloe reached for the largest doll. It was old, its dress yellowed, its hair real human hair. She turned it over in her hands, examining it closely. And then she saw it, a small seam at the back of the doll's head, barely visible beneath the hair. She pulled at it gently. A section of the porcelain came away in her hand. Inside the hollow head of the doll, tightly rolled and tied with a faded ribbon, was a letter. Chloe's hands shook as she unrolled it. The paper was thin, fragile, covered in the same handwriting she had seen in her grandmother's notebook. To whoever finds this, my name is Eleanor Vance. I am writing this because I am afraid. Afraid that Thomas Barlow will kill me before I can tell the truth. And the truth is this. She sat on the bedroom floor and read the letter from beginning to end. It took her 20 minutes. When she finished, she was crying. The letter contained everything. Thomas Barlow's confession, written in his own hand, delivered to Eleanor weeks before her death. In 1965, the same year as the photograph of the two brothers, Thomas had gotten into a fight with a man in a nearby town. A fight over money, over a debt. The man's name was Leonard Myers. He was a traveling salesman, passing through the area. No one knew him. No one would miss him. Thomas had killed him. Not intentionally, the letter claimed. A fight that got out of hand. A push that became a fall. But when Leonard Myers hit his head on a rock and stopped moving, Thomas made a choice. He buried the body in the woods and told no one. But Eleanor's husband, Chloe's grandfather, had found out. He had helped Thomas cover it up, out of loyalty to his brother. And that secret had bound them together for decades. When Chloe's grandfather died, Thomas became afraid. Afraid that Eleanor would tell someone. Afraid that the truth would come out. He started threatening her, reminding her that she was complicit too. She had known and stayed silent. The house wasn't really the issue. The house was just leverage. What Thomas really wanted was control. The letter detailed everything. Dates. Locations. The exact spot in the woods where Leonard Myers was buried. Thomas had written it all down because he was dying and wanted to clear his conscience. But Eleanor didn't trust him. She believed he would destroy the confession and come after her one last time. If you're reading this, the letter concluded, then I am probably dead. Thomas killed me, or had me killed. But now you know the truth. Go to the police. Tell them where to find the body. Tell them everything. Don't let him get away with this. Not again. Chloe called the police that night. The local constable arrived within the hour, a young man named Davies who looked barely old enough to shave. He read the letter, examined the notebook, and made notes in a small pad. Then he made a phone call to someone higher up. The next morning, Detective Inspector Rachel Morris arrived from the county constabulary. She was in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back and the weary expression of someone who had seen too much over too many years. She listened to Chloe's story without interrupting, read the documents carefully, and asked a few quiet questions. "You understand this is all very old," she said finally. "The murder Thomas confessed to happened 60 years ago. The man is probably dead by now. Even if we find the body, there may not be much we can do legally." "What about my grandmother?" Chloe asked. "She wrote that letter because she was afraid he would kill her. 2 weeks later, she was dead." Morris nodded slowly. "I've requested the death certificate and the original investigation files. At her age, heart failure isn't suspicious on its own. But with this..." She tapped the letter. "It raises questions. We'll reopen the case. We'll find Thomas Barlow and talk to him. He moved away 15 years ago, according to a woman in the village. Maybe. Or maybe he just told people that. We'll check records. We'll find him." Chloe wanted to believe her. But something in Morris's expression made her uneasy. The case was old. The victim was old. The suspect would be old too, if he was still alive. How hard would they really try? As if reading her thoughts, Morris leaned forward. "I lost my mother to a heart attack when she was 72, she said quietly. "I know what it's like to wonder. I'll do everything I can to get you answers. That's a promise." The investigation took 3 weeks. Chloe stayed in the house on Willow Lane, unable to leave, unable to stop thinking about her grandmother's final days. She talked to neighbors, piecing together fragments of memory. She learned that Thomas Barlow had been a familiar presence in Thornfield for decades, always on the edges, always angry. Several people remembered him arguing with Eleanor in the street. No one had ever intervened. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Detective Morris called. "We found him." Chloe's heart stopped. "Where?" "He's been living in Scotland for the past 12 years. Under a different name. But we matched his fingerprints to an old arrest record from the 1970s. It's definitely him." "Is he alive?" "Yes. He's 84 years old. Lives in a care facility outside Edinburgh. We interviewed him yesterday." Chloe held her breath. "What did he say?" Morris paused. "He confessed. Not to your grandmother's death, he denies that, and we have no evidence to connect him. But the murder from 1965? He confessed to everything. He told us exactly where to find the body. We're organizing an excavation now." Chloe sat down heavily, overwhelmed. "He just admitted it?" "He's old, Chloe. Dying, actually. Cancer. He said he wanted to clear his conscience before the end. He said he wrote that letter to your grandmother because he genuinely wanted to make peace. But she never responded. He assumed she'd destroyed it. She hid it instead. In a doll's head." Morris almost smiled. "Smart woman, your grandmother." The excavation took place 2 weeks later in a patch of woodland 30 miles from Thornfield. Chloe watched from a distance as forensic teams dug beneath an old oak tree, exactly where Thomas Barlow had described. The tree had stood for centuries, its branches spreading wide, its roots holding secrets. They found the remains within hours. A skeleton, wrapped in canvas that had mostly rotted away, buried in a shallow grave. Dental records confirmed the identity: Leonard Myers, a traveling salesman who had disappeared in 1965 and was never seen again. His family had reported him missing. No one had ever found him. The news spread quickly through Thornfield. Margaret from the shop arrived at the house with a casserole and tears in her eyes. "Your grandmother was a good woman," she said. "She deserved better." Chloe nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about her mother. Sarah had grown up in the shadow of this secret. She had lived in fear of Thomas, had watched her mother suffer for years, had finally fled and never looked back. She had died without knowing the truth. But maybe, in some way, she had known. Maybe that's why she never spoke about Thornfield. Maybe she was trying to protect Chloe from the same darkness. That night, Chloe sat in her grandmother's chair, in the sitting room where Eleanor had spent so many lonely hours. Through the window, she could see the garden, the roses her grandmother had loved. She made a decision. She wasn't going to sell the house. She wasn't going to run. This was her history, her family, her truth. She would stay. Thomas Barlow died 3 months later in the care facility in Scotland. He never stood trial, his health was too poor, his crimes too old. But he had confessed. The record existed. Leonard Myers finally had a name and a grave. Chloe received a letter from Thomas's solicitor, forwarded through the police. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten in an unsteady script. "Chloe, I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I did terrible things in my life, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. Your grandmother. Your mother. You, by extension. I wrote that letter to Eleanor because I wanted to die with a clear conscience. I see now that was selfish. Confession doesn't undo damage. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't give your mother back her childhood. But it's all I have to offer. The truth. I hope it's enough. Thomas. Chloe read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the metal box with the other documents, next to the photograph of 2 brothers smiling in front of a house on Willow Lane. She didn't know if she forgave him. She didn't know if she ever could. But she understood something now that she hadn't before, that the truth, however painful, was better than silence. That secrets festered in the dark, poisoning everything they touched. That bringing them into the light was the only way to finally let them rest. A year later, the roses in the garden bloomed more beautifully than anyone could remember. Chloe sat on the front step, watching the sun set over the village, and thought about her grandmother. About her mother. About all the years of fear and silence that had ended here, in this house, on this quiet street. The house on Willow Lane had given up its secrets. And in doing so, it had finally become a home.